theory of mind also enables me, doesn't it, to understand that you may not feel the same way that I feel. So that would start to link into empathy as well, because I might not feel what you feel, but I can understand that you feel it.
The question is from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Paul from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Richard from Thinking Focus.
And the question is, why is empathy a vital leadership skill?
There's a lot being said at the moment about empathy, Paul. Why do you think that is?
I'm going to guess here. I think people are in a lot of pain right now. They're hurting. Life's really hard. Life's got complex and difficult. You know, most people are expected to do multiple roles at the same time. They're supposed to be leader, manager, home worker, housewife, house husband, teacher, social worker, carer.
Yeah, so I guess that actually then the way that leaders approach their people, and whether they do it with empathy, the right amount of empathy, or no empathy, will have a major impact then, won't it? And it would at any time, wouldn't it? But even more heightened now, or recently.
And I think if you think, I don't know if you've listened to it, but last time on the podcast, Rob and I were talking about trust, and you go, well, one of the key factors of building trust is empathy. It's actually knowing that this other person kind of has your back a little bit and is kind of there for you. So I think it is becoming a sort of a modern day leadership skill to sort of go, if you can't express empathy, if you can't show that you understand the emotional side of the workforce around you, if you treat people as if they are just a set of machines, then actually you're not going to build the kind of relationship, and you're not going to build the kind of loyalty that you need from people when time gets difficult. When like at the moment, where we need people to kind of give a bit more when they're feeling empty.
But empathy, like most things, is not just a straightforward thing, is it? There are different types of empathy. We approach it in different ways, and our personality traits and sort of our personality type, if you like, also will have a bearing on our ability to be empathetic, won't it?
Yeah, so when researchers talk about empathy, they think about it a bit like trust as affective, the feeling-y side of empathy. So
my ability to feel what other people feel, that sort of thing.
Yeah, very, very much driven by what we would call the emotional part of the brain.
Yeah.
The faster, more primitive part of the brain. And then there's cognitive empathy, the more logical part of empathy from the rational brain, which is the ability to understand something from somebody else's perspective. There's a really interesting thing if you when people start training in psychology, almost everybody has to study a thing that's known as theory of mind, which is a really kind of weird thing, which is the simple concept of, as a human being, I understand that you understand that I understand your thinking.
Yeah, and theory of mind also enables me, doesn't it, to understand that you may not feel the same way that I feel.
Yes.
So that would start to link into empathy as well, because I may not, if you talked about, you talked there about the more rational part of empathy, cognitive, sort of the way that we approach it, the cognitive way. Actually, I might not feel what you feel, but I can understand that you feel it.
Yes. And so you go, so from a cognitive point of view, I can sit and imagine what this decision I'm about to make as a leader will mean for you. I can imagine how it's going to make you feel, but I don't necessarily have to feel it.
Yeah.
But I also could be trying to help you make the decision, not have high cognitive empathy, so not kind of understand it, but actually have high effective empathy, which means I'm just feeling it.
So the high cognitive empathy, so I can stand in your shoes and sort of imagine how you might feel, but not actually feel it.
Yep.
Is a really useful skill, isn't it? Because it's really useful for doing lots of things, sort of giving people feedback, having difficult conversations, that sort of stuff. But it also has a downside, doesn't it? Because if in the wrong hands, I could perhaps use that in quite a Machiavellian type way, couldn't I?
Yeah, so if you've got somebody who's got a really good cognitive empathy, they can work out how other people feel, and therefore they can communicate really well with them, articulate things in a way that touches them emotionally and allows them to come on a journey, yet at the same time have none of the feelings. So not have to kind of relate to that in a way that says, but I know I'm hurting you and I can feel that I'm hurting you. Then actually as a leader, you could be quite manipulative. It also, but the other side of it is it makes it easier to make difficult decisions.
Yeah, I mean, which is a skill and is needed, isn't it? Because if I have to make difficult decisions, but I feel the pain, I really, really feel the pain every time, that might mean I don't make those decisions, and actually they might be the right decision.
Yeah, and I've often wondered if that's why we see a lot of leaders who don't have great effective empathy, because actually, at points in the career, high effective empathy would make some of the tougher decisions they need to make really hard. You would take them home with you. I mean, everybody who's managed people at some point, you've had to let somebody go, whether that's redundancy or you've had to fire them, or and actually, if you feel their pain to a great extent, it's going to hurt. It's going to be really difficult. Daniel Goleman, the guy the psychologist who does all the emotional intelligence stuff, he breaks the effective empathy down into two parts. So he has this thing called the empathy triad. So he still has cognitive empathy, but he breaks the effective into two bits.
Yeah, he gives it different names, doesn't he? We talked about effective.
Yeah. He talks about emotional empathy, which is I feel the pain.
Yeah.
And then he talks about empathetic concern, which is more about I want to fix the pain. I want to help.
So if you go back so he talks about emotional empathy. So go back to that one. So that is I feel what someone else feels.
Yes.
And that can be both positive and negative, can't it? So I can...
Yeah, you can feel joy.
Huge joy for somebody else, and I can feel pain. And again, this is a really useful thing lots of the time, isn't it? Because it can help me navigate certain situations because I can feel what somebody else is feeling.
Yes.
But also could be really difficult because, as we've just described, I can feel what somebody else is feeling when things aren't good, which stops me from perhaps doing things.
Let me give you two examples of that. Right. So at one end of the spectrum, somebody may be in a senior sales role, or somebody, working with a group that's struggling. That high emotional empathy means they're going to be very in tune with the people around them. It's a great sales skill. If you can sit in the room and feel just in your bones when you're on the right track or when you're on the wrong track, if you can feel when you're annoying the customer, you can feel when the customer is kind of getting happy. How much power does that give you in that relationship? Because you can use that feeling to guide a conversation or guide a situation.
Yeah, and guide your next actions. Also really useful because many teams that are high performing have this sort of emotional empathy link, don't they? They can feel what each other are feeling and therefore can pick each other up and lift each other in the right direction and move people in the right direction.
So let's go to the other end of the spectrum on emotional empathy and go imagine somebody, and this is something that is seen a lot in caring professions. So you see this a lot in doctors, you see this a lot in nurses or care workers, high emotional empathy. So they really feel the pain of the people they're helping.
Yeah.
Actually, that's quite draining.
Yeah.
If you're working with, I don't know, horrific injuries, or you're working with people in a lot of pain and you feel all of that, and then you walk out at the end of every day having taken...
Yeah, you're going to be drained. Absolutely. I've got first-hand experience of that. My dad was an undertaker. That was his profession. And I vividly remember one Christmas when we were little, that he was dealing with a particularly difficult death of a young child that he was having to deal with. And it really drained him.
Yeah, because he's feeling all of their pain and all of their agony.
And he had to deal with, difficult stuff on a daily basis. But I think you reach, he was able to have a level of cognitive empathy and remain professional without getting too emotionally involved. But this particular example of it really, really drained him completely.
And I suspect it was the ability to have that emotional empathy that helped him on a day-to-day basis. When somebody in pain sits down in front of an undertaker, to understand how they're feeling, to be able to gauge that conversation in a way that is right for that individual
Yeah.
is an incredible skill.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But the downside of that is that one day someone's going to sit in front of you with a story that is so painful, and you're going to feel every bump in the road.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we also talked about empathetic concern, didn't we? Which is different, because this is the desire to sort of feel the problem,
Yep.
or feel the pain, the emotion, whatever it might be, and want to fix it.
Yeah, so this is the drives the desire to help. So this drives what we call pro-social behavior, which is just helping behavior. So again, you want a level of empathetic concern in an organization because it makes people good corporate citizens. If you've got really low empathetic concern, people are going to be self-interested.
Yeah, so this is the thing I think we were talking about before. Again, this trait helps teams, doesn't it? If people spot that someone's struggling,
Yeah.
and want to go and help and help fix the problem, and lift the whole team in the right direction. Whereas if you've got teams that are low on this, and it's not just business, is it? You could put this into other endeavors where you've got teams. If you've got teams that are low on this, it's kind of, well, I'll look after myself and I'm all right, and I'll leave everybody else behind.
Yeah, it's exactly what happens.
And this must be very difficult at the moment then for us, because we've got limited connection with other people. So, where I would normally pick up on some of these things, you can still do it through the, all right, it's less dimensional, but you can do it through Teams and through Zoom and other things that people are using. But that makes it harder, because we're not perhaps around people as much as we might be, and don't have those moments that you used to have at work, and you could see somebody was struggling to help. And that will have an impact for leaders, because we've got less of that data.
Yeah, so in sort of two ways. One is that I think it triggers empathetic concern when it's not needed. So this triggering, so you can imagine that and we've all done this. You've been on a call, and at the end of the call, you go, I've got to phone Richard. He didn't seem right on that call.
Mm.
And I think I've probably done it to you. And you phone up at the end of it, and you go, "Oh no, I was just busy, or the kids were distracting me."
Yeah, yeah, because you've got, that's what I mean by data. You've got less data points, haven't you, that enable you to make that judgment.
But you go the other way, and you and I have both dealt with people in the last few months where they go, "I just didn't know, I just didn't see it, because the emotional empathy that they were normally, the triggers of that, they're not getting enough of, because they're not seeing them enough, they're not getting enough feedback from them."
Yeah.
And the empathetic concern, well, they're becoming more detached from those individuals. There's an argument that I've read in a few places that talks about how much harder empathetic concern is as you grow up an organization, because you lose the connection, the social connection with the people around you. When you're running a team and you speak to that team every day, you create a bond. When you're 8 layers up, how do you have a bond?
That's a really interesting point, because one of the things I've often said over the years to many teams we've worked with, senior teams, is this thing where, the Queen thinks that she must think that the world smells of fresh paint. Yeah.
Yes.
And this is kind of the same for leaders, because if you aren't strong on emotional empathy, or empathy in general, then when people are telling you things, you might not have the ability to realize that, is this fresh paint? Are they telling me what I want to know, or are they being truthful with me? And your ability to read somebody becomes harder, because actually, again, what you're being told is kind of sanitized the further up you go.
Yeah, and I think it brings a really interesting concept. There's some work from a guy called, you're going to love this, a guy called Simon Baron-Cohen. If I'm right, I think he's from Cambridge University.
Mm-hmm.
And many years ago, I actually heard him talk. He's a really interesting guy. And he talks about this idea of kind of almost two types of brain. And yes, he is related to the person you're thinking.
Yes, Ali G.
Yes.
I'm thinking, is this?
Yeah, I think it's his cousin or something. They are related.
Right, okay.
But he talks about two types of brain. The empathizing. Sorry,
I'm just caught up in the Ali G thing now. They're two completely different careers, aren't they?
They are, yeah. And they're different people, yeah.
Anyway, carry on.
So he talks about an empathizing brain. So some of us are more wired to empathize. Some of us are more wired to systemize. And there is some arguments about, are there gender differences here? But again, like most of these things, they're preferences. It's not that.
So are we talking here on a scale then? So again, if you talk about one extreme to another, sort of at one end, some people have a very empathetic brain, and at the other end, some people are very systematic, and most of us are somewhere on that scale. Is that what you mean?
But yes, that's kind of my understanding of it.
Yeah.
And there are, we are at different points on this. And like I said, there's some gender differences. So you're more likely to be empathizing if you're female. You're more likely to be systemizing if you're male. But that doesn't, like all of these kind of differences, it doesn't mean that women are like this and men are like that. It just means that men are more likely to be at this end of the spectrum than they are that end.
Yeah, but it's not unusual for either to be at the other end.
But play this back through the leadership lens and go, at that middle point of your career when you're problem solving and sorting stuff out, running things and organizing stuff, the bit that leads you into the leadership roles, actually systemizing brains are going to help.
Is the systemizing, yeah.
So what are we doing? We're promoting lots of people with the systemizing brain into senior positions where we're asking them to lead people, and they need an empathizing brain.
And the further up you go, the more it becomes about taking people on a journey, being able to communicate, being able to understand, being able to be genuine. You talk about in the Trust podcast about being authentic. And logical is part of that as well, though, isn't it? Because you've got to systemize and you got to be logical. But actually, you've probably, if you're quite high up in the organization, got a lot of people around you that can do that for you. So your job becomes more about taking people on the journey.
And I think it's that classic leadership thing of, it's the Marshall Goldsmith quote of, what got you here won't get you there. Very often the skills and the things that got us to the position we're in suddenly become not the advantages they were to get us here, but disadvantages now we are here. And I think this is a classic example of that.
But we cling to them.
Yeah, because that's what we know.
Because we know, and that's what's safe. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's worth spending the last few minutes thinking about, well, actually, how do you cultivate empathy? How do you help people become more empathetic?
Yeah, and I think what seems an obvious one here is to consider why somebody's behaving in the way that they are.
I totally agree.
To think about what could it be that's caused them to do that? Is there a concern? Is there a worry that they've got? And this comes back to something I've talked about a number of times recently. Is I think more recently that organisations have realised they employ a whole person. They don't just employ the marketeer bit of a person. They don't just employ the sales bit. They don't just employ the accountant bit of a person. They employ everything. So if someone's performance is struggling, or someone's not having a great time at work, it's worth considering, well, what else could it be? What's going on? What concerns have they got? What worries have they got? And that is the place to start, really, not to kind of go, you need to up your performance, otherwise you're out.
Yeah, and I think if you play that, I always remember there's the thing that Stephen Covey says, which is about intentions and actions.
Yeah.
That we judge ourselves through intentions and others through actions.
Yeah.
You have to stop and go, not what did they do, but why did they do that? What other things were going on in their life? What other things were happening?
And this is like the guy that, cuts you up at the traffic lights, and we immediately think, well, he's a so-and-so, what we do is make a comment on his character rather than actually maybe his mum's just been rushed into hospital and he's got to get there really quickly. And if we cut somebody up, it'll be, well, I'm running late and I've got this important meeting to get to. It doesn't mean I'm a nasty person.
Yeah, and so that brings us to another thing to think about, which is, assuming positive intent in other people. Start from the basis of no one gets up in the morning to try and make everybody else have a bad day. They're doing this for what they perceive or believe to be the right reasons.
Yeah.
Now let me understand why they're doing what they're doing. Because then I can start to think about, well, what might be causing that behavior? What might be causing them to react in that way or say that thing or do that thing?
And positive intent could be, you might struggle to see sometimes, well, how could they think that was a good thing? But again, it goes, you have to think about things from different perspectives, from what in their shoes, with their worries, with their concerns, the things going on in their head, they would read it differently to another person or to you or me.
Exactly. And the other side of that, I think, which is really interesting, is we have to stop in ourselves and examine our own biases and preferences. Because actually, I would do this because that's the way I see the world, or that's the way I like to work, or that's what works for me. But I can't impose that on other people.
Yeah.
So I can't assume just because you've tackled this in a different way that I'm right and you're wrong. We're just doing it differently.
And you also can't assume just because people work in the same team or work in the same company or work in the same industry that they see things the same, even if they do the same job, because they're different people with different life stories.
Yeah, exactly.
So you will always sort of read things differently and see things differently.
And then the last thing in terms of cultivating empathy, which, and I've left this to last deliberately because it's so blooming hard. Listening.
And it really is difficult. It's more difficult now than ever because I think we're more distracted now than ever.
Agreed.
I think brains are much more easily poked, aren't they, by distractions, whether it be an email, your phone pinging, somebody texting you, or some app sending you a notification about the weather or whatever it might be. There's millions of these, isn't there, all the time, and everything seems really important all the time, which means, whether it's our phone or whether it's the television, we often fail to really give people our full attention, don't we? And it does become very hard to actually listen.
And very often, even when you're not distracted and you're in a conversation and you're present in that conversation, you're not really listening. You find yourself in a situation where you're trying to work out what your next statement's going to be or what you need to say, particularly in a work situation where there's a lot of pressure to contribute and say something interesting and look good. So you're not listening to what's being said. You're listening to snippets of it to work out when you're going to get to speak or when you're going to get to say your point.
In leadership situations, particularly one-to-one situations, that's very dangerous as well, because if you really focus on the other person, they're giving you a lot of information about what they really think and feel, not just through what they're saying, but through the way they look, through body language, through tone of voice, through minute facial expression. And actually, if we're kind of distracted in our own heads, we miss a lot of that. And it's also worth pointing out, we all do this. This is not, you and me criticizing anybody. We all are guilty of doing it.
Yeah, you and I, this is our life. This is our job. This is our training. We're professionals at what we do. And I think I can think of times when I've been coaching people where I've had to sit and say to my head, stop, shut up, listen. You don't need to say anything. You need to just listen to this person.
Yeah.
Let them get to the end, pause, then work out what you're going to say. Because my brain will go boom, off in a tangent. And the second it's gone boom, am I really listening? Am I listening properly? I'm going to be picking up snippets at best at that point.
But it's difficult in every interaction all day long for a busy person, a leader, or whatever you're doing, to 100% be listening. So I think it's really important to realize as a leader, there's some really key moments when you do really need to tune in. Just as you've described there, what you're saying is key moment here with a customer, someone you're coaching, with a client, whatever it might be. It could be with your wife. It could be with your wife, with a member of the team. Key moment here. I need to tune in.
Yeah, and empathy is going to come at this moment by doing nothing else than listening, only listening with a lens that says, I'm going to go beyond what you're saying to why you're saying it, to deeply understand the words. I'm not saying I'm going to agree with you. I'm not saying you're right. I'm not saying that, I'm giving you anything more than that. I'm just saying that the empathy comes from that moment of going, right, it's your turn. Let me understand before I even respond. But that's tough.
Yeah, very tough to do.
And then you stick Teams and Zoom in the equation just to add insult during the week.
Yeah, and it takes it to another level.
Absolutely. So that for me is kind of, we've kind of ripped apart empathy, but you kind of go, right now, leading without that means you're not building the trusted relationships you need. You're not building the connections you need with people to go and do the things you need to do.
I've really enjoyed that conversation. I think there's some really fascinating things in there for our listeners and for us all to think about. And also, what was enjoyable is I didn't think we'd ever do one of these podcasts and talk about Ali G.
Well, you never know. Live and learn.
Next time on The Question Is.
Hi, this is Paul from Think in Focus, and I just dropped onto the end of this podcast to tell you what's coming next in the series. For the next 4 podcasts, we're going to be looking at a thing we call the Pillars of Leadership, a model we've developed for our coaching work with people who want to do big roles or senior roles in organizations to help them think about all the different aspects of it. So over the next 4 weeks, we'll be looking at the personal impact of these bigger jobs, the cognitive skills you need to work at that level, how to stay resilient, and the kind of best practice that we see in some people who already work at those kind of bigger roles or senior leadership positions, and the awareness that you need of yourself and others and the environment to operate at a top level. If you can't wait until the next podcast, that's okay. You can check out the Pillars of Leadership at our website, www.thinkingfocus.com/pillars of leadership. That's pillars-of-leadership.
To find out how Thinking Focus can unlock the potential within your organisation, go to www.thinkingfocus.com, where you'll discover more about the work we do, helping our clients increase productivity and enable change.